It's a Friday afternoon in January. The air over Hexham is cold and grey, and the town centre is filling up with teenagers doing what teenagers do, wandering the shops, laughing too loud, killing time before the weekend. Among them is a 15-year-old girl named Holly Newton. She has her coat pulled tight, and she's smiling. She doesn't know that someone is already watching her from across the street. She doesn't know he followed her from school. She doesn't know he has a knife. What happened in Priestpopple, Hexham, on January 27, 2023, would shake all of England. A 15-year-old girl who had simply tried to end a relationship, attacked in broad daylight in a busy town centre, while her friends were just around the corner. This is the full story of Holly Newton, and the disturbing truth about what happens when obsession is mistaken for love.
The small, peaceful town of Hawtwhistle in Northland, northeastern England, is where Holly Newton was raised. Families congregate there on weekends. Children grow up playing outside, and everyone knows one another. Holly was a perfect fit for that world, warm, vivacious, and genuinely kind. She was the type of person who would go above and beyond to assist a friend. Without being asked, teachers at Queen Elizabeth High School in the nearby town of Hexham characterized her as quiet but diligent, someone who showed up, worked hard, and got along with everyone. People were drawn to her because she was the type of person who truly listened. Even though she wasn't the loudest person in the room, Holly had interest outside of school. That kept her occupied. And content, she had a passion for dancing. She was an athlete after school. She spent time in town with her close friends, hanging out at the stores along Priestpell, grabbing food, and enjoying her freedom as a 15-year-old. She had a deep affection for animals, especially the family cat later. Her mother, Mala Tressler, would tell the court that she was a content adolescent who would go to any lengths for anyone. Holly was described by those who knew her as being self-sufficient for her age, not carelessly, but because she knew exactly who she was and what she stood for. She was devoted. She had empathy when it counted. She was the type of friend who was there. She was adored by those around her because of her warmth and loyalty. Tragically, she was the kind of person who always tried to see the best in others first, which may have made it difficult for her to realize how dangerous the situation had become. Holly Newton was just that, a girl with her entire life ahead of her, who cared about those around her, and who laughed with ease. She had done nothing wrong and was 15 years old. All she had done was try to break off a relationship that didn't feel secure. Army Cadets, a youth organization in which both teenagers were involved, introduced Holly to Logan McPhail. The connection didn't seem concerning at first. They were young people getting to know one another through a shared activity. For a while, the relationship seemed to be just like any other teenage romance. However, after about 18 months, things started to change. McPhail grew more domineering. According to evidence that was later introduced during the trial, he kept an eye on Holly's social media profiles. He became extremely envious of her other friendships. He tried to keep her apart from the people in her immediate vicinity. Investigators were later informed by friends that Holly had observed the shift and that the relationship had begun to feel claustrophobic, uncomfortable, and under pressure. Holly made the choice that anyone in her situation ought to be able to make. She broke up with him. She desired separation. She desired to let go at the age of 15. She made an effort to act bravely and healthily by leaving. Nobody ought to have to defend that choice. Nobody ought to have to bargain their way out of a partnership. No, she replied, and it ought to have ended there. Acceptance did not follow. It was an escalation. Despite her wishes, McPhail started contacting her frequently. After the breakup, Holly reportedly confided in friends that she thought he was following her. She felt uneasy. She was keeping an eye on her. Mala, her mother, became so concerned about what she was hearing that she called the police. She was afraid her daughter was being pursued by someone who was unable to let go. She was correct, too. When the attack occurred, Logan McPhail was 16 years old. He first met Holly while participating in Army Cadets. Having grown up in northeastern England, people who knew him said he was an emotionally troubled young man. He had a history of having trouble controlling strong emotions and had been diagnosed with autism and learning disabilities later on. Those diagnoses would be discussed in relation to his case in court. However, prior to all of that, those in his immediate vicinity noticed something. Easier and more direct rejection was too much for him. Something in him changed when Holly ended the relationship, not in the direction of acceptance or grief, but in the direction of obsession. The change was already apparent to those who knew him through social circles and cadets. He was incredibly envious He had erratic emotions. After the breakup, his obsession with Holly took over someone who, according to all accounts, could not bear the thought that she had decided to move on without him. The situation was clearly getting worse in the days preceding January 27th despite their breakup. MacPhail continued to contact Holly on a regular basis. He was arriving close to her house. He was following her. Every move. Holly felt uneasy and scared. Her friends had been informed. Her mother had been informed, although the adults in her life were taking it seriously. Time was running out and the intervention machinery was moving slowly. On January 26, 2023, the night before the murder, MacPhail went to Holly's home and stood outside for hours. He made an effort to get her to come out. She declined. She remained indoors. After a while, he departed. However, the length of time he spent standing outside her house in the dark in January, waiting for a girl who had already informed him that their relationship was over, speaks volumes about the extent of his obsession. This was not a teen dealing with grief. This was much riskier. Later on, that night would prove to be crucial proof of deliberate stalking, a pattern that had been developing for days and was now at an all-time high. Holly's mother had already expressed her worries to the police. She was aware of a serious problem. She was attempting to persuade her daughter to assist. She had scheduled a meeting with the officers, but it had not yet taken place before anyone could step in. January 27th arrived. January 27th, 2023, Friday at around 3:25 p.m. Queen Elizabeth High School's classes ended. With their backpacks slung over their shoulders, students flocked outside into the chilly January air to plan their weekend. It was the kind of typical Friday that most people forget about by Sunday. Routine, unremarkable, and quietly content. Holly Newton went to Priest Pell, the main shopping street in Hexham Town Center, after leaving school with her friends. She was chatting and laughing, totally relaxed before she had even left the school gates. Someone had already started the day, and she had no way of knowing it. Logan MacPhail arrived in Hexham at around 3:45 p.m. Before traveling, he had already taken a kitchen knife from his house. Investigators would subsequently verify that he did not arrive in Hexham on a whim or by accident, but rather with the express purpose of finding Holly. He had decided he knew she spent her Friday afternoons in the town, so he went to his kitchen, grabbed a knife, and drove there. When he arrived in the town center and started looking around the crowds, he had the knife concealed in his clothes. CCTV footage showed MacPhail surveying the crowds by 10 p.m. He saw Holly and her pals in the vicinity of the stores. From that point on, he started to follow them, following them through the streets while never getting close to Holly for almost an hour. He observed her laughing, chatting with her friends, and simply being a teenager on a Friday afternoon, without realizing that she was being pursued. His movements were captured in remarkable detail by CCTV camera as he was observed pacing, shifting positions, getting closer, and then retreating. He briefly vanished from the camera's view at one point. According to the police, he was shifting his position in order to outpace Holly's group. Later, the prosecution would tell the jury that this was a planned, intentional pursuit, not an emotionally overwhelmed young man, but someone who was dangerous enough to follow through, patient enough to plan, and cold enough to wait. Some of Holly's friends had begun making their way home by 4:50 p.m. She stayed with a male friend in the town center. MacPhail remained close by, observing and biding his time. By 5:05 p.m., he took the initiative. He went over to them. Witnesses claimed that he requested a private conversation with Holly. "You remember that particular detail?" She agreed. Even at that precise moment, she moved aside to speak. Perhaps she believed she could make sense of him. Perhaps she believed that a discussion would put an end to it. She moved in the direction of a tiny alley close to Priest Pell. Her companion was waiting close by. The conversation seemed tense. According to witnesses, according to investigators, they got into a heated argument about the breakup because MacPhail had not accepted it. It took about 60 seconds for what came next. MacPhail took the knife out of his clothes at around 5:10 p.m. The violence that ensued was overwhelming, but it lasted less than a minute. In a furious, unrelenting attack, Holly sustained dozens of wounds. She did not leave without a struggle. Her hands and arms had defensive wounds, which were later verified by forensic evidence, the tangible evidence that she had attempted to deflect the blade, defend herself, and survive. When a nearby teenage boy heard what was going on, he bolted in their direction. He attempted to yank MacPhail from Holly. MacPhail turned the knife on him, then repeatedly stabbed him. Without pausing, the boy suffered severe injuries. He was lucky to survive. According to doctors, it's possible that his actions stopped the attack from going any farther. The attack ended at around 5:12 p.m. The alley that had been a private area just moments before was now a crime scene. The bystanders were yelling. People hurried toward the sound from the main street. Some made an effort to assist Holly. A few attempted to restrain MacPhail. At 5:13 p.m., emergency calls started coming in the Priest area, a street where teenagers congregated every Friday to mingle and pretend to be young and normal. Had just seen something that would never be forgotten. By 5:17 p.m., paramedics had arrived and started Holly's treatment right away. Trauma doctors battled to save her life after she was hurriedly taken to the Royal Victoria Infirmary in Newcastle. After receiving on-the-spot medical attention, the boy was transported to a hospital where surgeons performed surgery on his stab wounds. He was lucky to survive, according to doctors. Holly Newton passed away from her wounds that night. Despite the medical team's best efforts, her age was 15. There was nothing wrong with her. All she had done was try to leave. It is worth taking a moment to pause here. This occurred on a Friday afternoon in a crowded town on a busy street. A 15-year-old girl died before anyone could intervene, despite the presence of witnesses and bystanders. That is the reality of how quickly targeted violence can develop, which is why it is so important to intervene early before it ever gets to that stage. Later that night, Logan MacPhail was taken into custody. He didn't run very far. He made a statement during police questioning that would shape a large portion of the trial's early stages. He claimed he couldn't recall carrying out the assault. He asserted that he had brought the knife with the intention of harming himself, and that he had come to Hexham not to harm Holly, but to harm himself. The case against him was developed over several weeks by investigators that had a lot of proof. There was a lot of CCTV footage. It depicted him coming into Hexham with a gun, seeing Holly, and pursuing her around the town for almost an hour prior to the assault. It depicted him methodically pursuing her through a public area while concealing a knife in his clothes. The claim of spontaneity was directly refuted by the video. The pattern of contact and obsession after the breakup was recorded by digital evidence found on phones and social media witness accounts, corroborated Holly's claims to her friends that she had experienced fear and stalking. It was determined that the kitchen knife came from his house. Each piece of evidence supported the same conclusion. This was prearranged in 2024. The trial was held at Newcastle Crown Court. It lasted for 6 weeks. The prosecution's story was lucid and comprehensive because he could not accept that Holly had broken up with him. MacPhail had purposefully armed himself, purposefully traveled to Hexham, purposefully stalked her through the town center, and purposefully attacked and killed her. When he finally had the chance, the defense contended that MacPhail's autism and learning disabilities had impacted his capacity to comprehend the rejection, regulate his emotional reaction. They insisted that his declared intention had been self-harm rather than harm to Holly, and that the attack had been impulsive rather than planned. These arguments were rejected by the jury. They returned a guilty verdict on the murder charge. After giving it considerable thought, the boy who had attempted to intervene was stabbed, and MacPhail was found guilty of wounding with intent. He was given a life sentence with a minimum of 17 years in prison by the judge in November 2024. According to the judge, the attack was vicious, intentional, and motivated by jealousy. The courtroom fell silent as Holly's mother gave a victim impact statement. She talked about how she got to the crime scene. She talked about what happened after. She explained the experience of losing a 15-year-old daughter to a boy who was unable to let her go. Her words served as a constant reminder that the subject of this case was neither a forensic exhibit nor a legal argument. On a chilly Friday afternoon in January, a real girl with a real family and a real future was taken from her legal and forensic analysis. From a forensic perspective, this case has a number of components that, while still sobering, made the prosecution's task rather simple. MacPhail's movements were remarkably detailed by the extensive CCTV coverage of Hexham Town Center. His entire afternoon arrival, stalking pattern, positioning, and attack moment were all recreated by investigators. The defense's claim of spontaneity was undermined by that video alone. The number of wounds listed in Holly's autopsy is important for a number of reasons. It first determines the attack's duration and intensity. Injuries of that magnitude cannot be caused by a single impulsive act. The severity of the injuries is in line with persistent, targeted violence. Second, forensic specialists discovered a pattern that criminal psychologists call overkill, or using far more force than was required, indicating that the attack was motivated more by intense emotional rage than by a deliberate desire to swiftly end a life. Holly's defensive wounds on her arms and hands are also very significant. They attest to the fact that Holly fought back, was conscious for a considerable amount of the attack, and felt the assault rather than being rendered instantly helpless. This is legal and medical implications. It highlights the violence's protracted nature. The classification issue was one of the case's most prominent legal features at the time. UK law did not automatically classify Holly's killing as domestic homicide because she was 15 years old. Since then, her family has actively worked to alter that. They make a strong case that the patterns in this instance are the same as those observed in domestic homicides committed by adults. Targeted deadly violence, stalking, coercive control, and an inability to accept the end of a relationship. The victim's age has no bearing on the type of crime. Psychological characteristics. What the evidence reveals. This case's psychology aligns with a well-documented pattern of violence against intimate partners. The fact That the individuals involved are teenagers does not make it any less dangerous. The warning signs are more likely to be written off as typical teenage drama, which makes it even riskier. MacPhail displayed a number of behaviors that are considered high risk indicators in abusive relationships by domestic violence, researchers and mental health professionals, obsessive jealousy, keeping an eye on a partner's social media accounts, trying to keep the partner away from friends, refusing to accept the breakup, increasing contact after the breakup, and physical surveillance including standing outside the victim's house are some of these. Heartbreak is not indicated by these symptoms, they are indicators of control through coercion. Additionally, they frequently precede acts of violence, what psychologists refer to as rejection. Sensitivity is the clinical idea at the core of this behavior, a severe incapacity to accept the notion that someone else has made the decision to leave. Taken to a dangerous extreme, this rejection can set off a chain reaction of entitlement and anger in some people. In this warped framework, Holly's existence as a person who had moved on becomes an intolerable threat. The logic, if it can be called that, becomes, if I cannot have you, no one will. Psychological attention should also be given to the stalking behavior. In the hours preceding the attack, when MacPhail first saw Holly, he did not attack her. He spent almost an hour following her. He held out. He shifted his position. He picked his time. Someone experiencing an uncontrollable emotional breakdown would not act in this way. It is the conduct of a patient, deliberate, and focused individual. You can learn a lot about the mental state from the planning itself. Emotion did not overpower him. He was in charge of himself, and he was using that power to pursue someone who had merely attempted to escape him. The way we teach young people to identify unhealthy relationship dynamics is also called into question by this case. Holly confided in friends that she felt pursued. Her mother told the police about her worries. Nevertheless, the system did not operate quickly enough. The unsettling reality is that coercive control is consistently underappreciated, undertreated, and underfunded. Particularly when it comes to teenagers, the Holly story is an appeal to alter that summary of the case and concluding thoughts. The facts of this case are both devastating and obvious, so let's return to the timeline. Logan MacPhail was introduced to 15-year-old Holly Newton of Northland by Army cadets. She ended the relationship after 18 months. He was unable to accept it. He started following her, keeping an eye on her online, waiting outside her house, and repeatedly getting in touch with her against her will. Her mother told the police about her worries. There was a scheduled meeting with the officers. Prior to that meeting, on January 27, 2023, MacPhail went to Hexham with a kitchen knife from his house in the town center. He discovered Holly. He spent almost an hour following her after approaching her and requesting a private conversation. He attacked her with a degree of violence that the court would later characterize as frenzied and devastating. Additionally, a boy who attempted to assist her suffered severe injuries after being taken to the hospital. Holly passed away that same evening. MacPhail was taken into custody. He was found guilty of murder at trial in 2024 and given a life sentence with a minimum of 17 years. The judge described the assault as vicious, intentional, and motivated by jealousy. Since then, Holly's mother has turned into an advocate for legal reform, working to have adolescent relationship violence recognized as domestic abuse under UK law. Holly Newton had every right to leave. She was worthy of a future. She was deserving of respect. It wasn't a crime of passion what happened to her. It was a possession crime committed by someone who thought he owned someone, who had made the decision to be free. The fact that the warning signs were present and obvious is what this case should teach us. Controlled jealousy, suffocating isolation, and contact that continues even after the word no. These are not indications of affection, they are warning indicators, and they are just as common in adolescent relationships as they are in adult ones. Please take this seriously if you are watching this and something in Holly's story seems familiar to you. If something in that relationship dynamic sounds like something you're going through, or if a friend has told you about it, speak with someone, inform a responsible adult, make use of a helpline. Since her daughter's passing, Holly's mother has worked to ensure that this tale saves lives. Listening is the least we can do. Please share this video. If you think it's important, leave a comment below and subscribe to the channel to ensure you never miss a case. Both this community and these discussions are important. Holly Newton should not only be remembered as a victim, but also as an inspiration for improvement. Holly Newton, may you rest in peace. From 2007 to 2023.